Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Yes, there are still no newspapers tonight in New York City, so don't blame Dad if he couldn't bring you the comics. Because on direction of Mayor LaGuardia, your city station is going to perform that little duty. Yes, once again, as has been our custom during the past 13 days, WNYC brings you the Comic Parade, a roundup of the activities and adventures of your favorite comic strip characters as they appeared in today's local newspapers. And with us this evening, on invitation of His Honor the Mayor, is the well-known sports authority and comic writer, Chic Cohen, to read the comics for you. Come in, Chic.
Thank you, Milton Slater, for that gracious introduction. And good evening, folks. Well, after the great array of stars that have read the daily comics the past 13 days, not forgetting, of course, our eminent mayor and super performer, Fiorella H. LaGuardia, I do hope that I'm equal to this most pleasurable task of at least in some sense or measure conveying the characters of the comic happening. I've been trying to get into the scheme of things. In other words, I've tried to get into character, so I came down to this job, to the municipal building, on a pogo stick while playing with my yo-yo. Now listen, gang. Gee, I hope I make good, because the kids on my street have warned me. If I don't, well, they won't let me be their mascot. They've got a ball team called the Rockets. So here goes. I'm going to start with one of my favorites, Orphan Annie. Well, we all know that Orphan Annie is on trial for her life as a result of the death of Mrs. Bleating Heart. Well, in the first picture you see a courtroom with the judge on the bench. The judge is yawning, while Orphan Annie's lawyer is making a plea for her. The lawyer is saying, and this is while he's addressing the jury, he says, "And so, members of the jury, you have seen that Mrs. Bleating Heart's tragic death could have been an accident." And then you see the foreman of the jury, who happens to be a woman with a very, very sour face, just looks up and says, And then in the next picture, which is practically the same as the first, with the exception that now, well, what do you think? The judge is now asleep. He's asleep and really snoring. Yeah, he's sawing wood. But the lawyer is carrying on with his defense speech, and it's a great speech. Speech for Orphan Annie. And he says, "My client is but just a child. She has maintained her innocence throughout this trial. And I firmly believe that she is. Yes, she must be. I believe she is innocent." And then in the third picture, which is the final one, we see the same exact scene, but with this exception, that the judge now, yes, he is awakened from his deep slumber. But instead, what do you think he's doing? He's reading a newspaper. While the lawyer is continuing for Orphan Annie, and with outstretched arms says to the jury, "So I ask you, that you, the jury, find my client not guilty." Gee, kids, I wish I had tomorrow's papers to find out what's going to happen. Well, now we come to another one of my favorites. It's called Dick Tracy. I know it's one of yours, too. In the first picture, you find Dick Tracy and his assistant in an open car. Looks like a very fast automobile. I guess one that might be capable of doing nearly 100 miles an hour. Think of that. And his assistant asks Dick, "Did they find Wet Wash? And what about Breathless?" And Dick Tracy answers, "Yeah, they found the laundry truck. They found it on the side road out southeast of town. And we're heading there now." And then in the next picture, or scene, we find Breathless. Yes, we find Breathless in the farmer's shack. I mean a room in the farmer's shack. She's looking out of the window, but she's always holding on to that big bag of money. And you hear her saying to herself, "The squat car is still out front. I'd better go out and back away and get away from here." Well, in the next picture, she's gotten out of the shack, and you see her in the fields. I think it looks like a cornfield to me. And in the field is a farmer tilling the ground. He's tilling it with a big, large tractor. And Breathless is thinking. She says, "That farmer. Wonder if he won't. Why not? He looks as though he could use some money. And then in the next picture, you see her talking to the farmer. Well, this farmer looks very seedy, and he's shabby and torn clothes. He goes right over to Breathless and says, and yes, he says very politely, B.O. Plenty is the name, miss. Can I be of any help? And all Breathless says, did you say B.O. Plenty? Gee, gang, this is getting more interesting every day. And now we come to Little Abner. Yes, that's by Al Cap. You see in the first picture or scene, little Abner Yorkum sitting in bed with only his shorts on. One hand on his head and seems to be in deep thought. Deep thought, saying to himself, I obeys my mammy. Same as any decent 18-year-old child. And in the second scene, well, it's virtually the same, only that he's now lying on the bed instead of sitting, and with one foot stretched up high, and he's saying to himself, if Mammy says no shaking hands with nobody, no how, then that's exactly what I don't do. And then in the next scene, which is the final picture, well, you see him out of bed. He's looking at the picture of that beautiful girl in question. And you hear him say, and he sobs while he says it, but her hand's so sweet and so tender and so innocent. What harm could I make in just this one harmless little exception? Well, gang, let's see what'll happen tomorrow about whether or not he'll shake hands. I don't know. I have my doubts, but we'll see. And now I've been asked to tell the latest happenings of the Flop family by Swan. In the first picture, you see little baby Flop in the living room peeking into the bedroom. And he hears Mother Flop telling Old Man Flop, now hold still. And then in the next scene, you see Old Man Flop running out the back door into the backyard, hollering out loud, and to Gabby, who happens to be passing by the fence. He says, bah, that woman. And then in the next picture, you see the old man talking to Gabby over the fence and saying, yeah, Gabby, my wife's the original pinup girl. And then in the next and final picture, you see the old man Flop still talking to Gabby, but he's bending down. And you see a picture of a large safety pin attached to his suspenders. Yes, it's holding up his pants. Gee, what a big pin. And you hear him tell Gabby, yeah, she never sews a button on as long as there's a pin around. I guess that's why he called her a pinup girl. And now getting away from the comics just a moment, I'd like to tell some of the children why Mayor LaGuardia always wears a big hat, and is sometimes jokingly called a hat. Well, it just happens that our great mayor is really a cowboy at heart. You see, he was born in Prescott, Arizona. His dear daddy was in the Army at that time, and he was stationed in Arizona, where his daddy was the leader of an Army band. Well, Mayor LaGuardia, as I said, was born there, and as a child, he learned quickly the ways of cowboying and wrangling. You see, children, I must tell you that I, too, have lived in Arizona, lived there for many years, and I heard many stories told about our mayor and his great ability to ride horses. Do you know when he was just a little jigger of a boy, he could already break broncs. Then as he grew up, well, he came east and studied law, but always wore his big hat. I guess you know, in the last war, some of you don't, I'd like to tell you, the mayor was a great flyer. Yes, a great one. And flying at that time was practically new. That was so far as war was concerned. But Mayor LaGuardia sure knew his business. With it all, he never forgot the Great West and his great home in Arizona. So I kind of guess, maybe for sentimental reasons, he still wears his 10-gallon fedora. And now, well, that's enough of that. Back to the comics. Now it will be Smiling Jack. My very good friend and pal, Joe Laurie, Jr., did such a great job in reading the comic script last night that I, too, have found a great deal of interest in Smiling Jack. In the first picture, well, there's a scene in the stateroom of the ship with Jungle Jolly saying to Wiki, I sure miss pretty sweet Susan. And then there's Wiki telling herself, I must stop him liking Susan, but he may keep talking about her, even after Jack comes back. Then in the second picture, you just see a real close-up picture of Wiki alone, saying to herself, well, I certainly would not want Jungle Jolly to keep reminding Jack of Susan. And besides, I don't like the idea of Jack being at the bomber base, where she is, either. But I can't help that. But in the next picture, you see the vessel on the high seas. But you do hear the voices. As Jungle Jolly says, you love Susan too, don't you, Wiki? But Wiki says loudly, no. She's mean to your daddy. She's the operation officers who sends him on bombing missions to get shot at by the Japs. Well, think of that. But then in the last and final scene, you hear Jungle Jolly asking, are you sure, Wiki? He says, I thought the Army sent Daddy out on those bombing missions. You see, gang, Jungle Jolly is no fool. But Wiki realizes she didn't get away with it. Don't kid yourself. Because she says to herself, well, I guess that didn't go over. But maybe I planted a seed of hate against him. Well, I doubt it. That Jungle Jolly is too smart to me. And now, well, here's the one that I haven't seen in a long time. I'm glad I've got the papers. It's Gasoline Alley. You see in the first picture, Skeezix shaving in the bathroom. And then Nina pops her head in and says, Skeezix, has Brownie made any move towards paying the $25 he borrowed? And Skeezix replies, not yet, Nina. But he's had it. But she says, but he's had it. But he said, no, but he's had it only less than a week. Then in the next picture, he's still shaving. And you hear Nina as she spouts out, I don't see how they can be so hard up for rent money. His wife just came out with a $24.95 dress. So in the next and last picture, Skeezix is he's drying his face. He just completed his shaving and says to Nina, well, that poor woman, that silly woman just lives for clothes. I'm glad my wife is interested in other things. How did you know what she paid for it? And Nina says, well, I priced it before she ever saw it. And now I see my time is up. Well, I'm sorry, because I'd love to talk on to you children. But please permit me to deviate from the comics to pay my humble thanks to Mayor LaGuardia through my real friends Harry Hirschfield and Joe Laurie Jr. for giving me this grand privilege of doing my little help along in this goal we're all striving for. Well, it's a thing called happiness. But I cannot leave without giving my reasons or my personal 21-gun salute to our great mayor who created this elementary but angelic formula to permit the children of this greatest city in the entire world to follow the fame and fortunes of their favorite comic characters. In closing, I must say, I'm indeed proud to have been of some little assistance, regardless of how humble, to Fiorella H. LaGuardia, a human. Well, good night, kids. It's a pleasure to be with you. Believe me that I, like all these great performers, other performers that have been on this program and read the comics, love each and every boy and girl. Be good, kids. May God bless you all, forever and a day.
Thank you, Chic Cohen. Thanks very much for being with us tonight and helping all of New York City's youngsters get to bed happily and content after learning of the adventures of their favorite comic strip characters. For the duration of the newspaper delivery tie-up in New York City, your city station has expanded its news periods to bring you the latest local city developments, and as a special feature twice daily at 8:05 a.m. and 6:15 p.m., we present the Comic Parade, rounding up the comic strips. Tomorrow morning at 8:05, Inez Karma reads the funnies, and tomorrow evening at 6:15, Roger Bauer will read the comic strips. And remember, too, that at 11 a.m. and 6 p.m., WNYC broadcasts the latest War Department redeployment announcements concerning the American troops in Europe. This is the Municipal Broadcasting System.